Now we go to Southern Africa, where the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, Ruben Brigitte, says South Africa provided weapons to Russia and this could jeopardize 400 billion rands trade between both countries. This comes after a deadlock in diplomatic talks about South Africa violating its own non-aligned stance on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The United States envoy to South Africa said he was confident a Russian ship had picked up weapons in Simonstown in a possible breach of Pretoria's declared neutrality in the Ukraine conflict. The South Africa presidency says there will be an independent inquiry into the U.S. allegations. Well, joining me on the news now to discuss this is our political analyst, Gustavo de Carvalho. Thank you, Gustavo, for joining us.
Thank you for having me again.
It's a pleasure. Now, Gustavo, how worried should South Africans be? Because this is not looking good from its international relations perspective. South Africa is kind of playing a piggy on this, don't you think?
It is a space, certainly, for South Africa to be concerned about. We have been sitting on the fence for around a year and a half, and not necessarily with its own non-aligned position. I think that in a way we see a lot of other countries in the global south taking non-aligned positions, will not necessarily get into the flack that we have, especially because I think part of the challenge for us has been that our rhetoric and our actions have often confronted one another. And I think especially when it comes to the cozy relationships that South Africa has created with Russia, whether it is in terms of the high-level visits. Our Minister of Defense was in Moscow last year for a military conference. We had a visit of the now infamous vessel from Russia, Lady R, in December to South Africa, and also military exercises that were done this year in the country too. So I think we are in a crossroads in terms of our own foreign policy, and particularly how do we balance global geopolitical disputes without necessarily being too involved in that. And I think probably now it's a bit too late not to be involved, but certainly there is a lot of damage control that needs to be done at a governmental level in South Africa right now.
Okay, Gustavo, let's also talk about the president's response on this. In Parliament, he refused to answer on the matter. Hours later, he says he will appoint an independent inquiry. Are we correct that this feeds to the trends that we have seen, with the presidency maybe not being in control or on top of everything we saw, but we saw this with the International Criminal Court and other various things as well. What is your take on this?
Certainly the response from the presidency yesterday frustrated a lot of people, especially because it was unclear, it was uncertain. Probably a better response than what we saw with the ICC situation, where the president made a statement and it was corrected by his own party on the same day. But at the same time, I think it does brings us a lot of worry, because if that was not the case, if arms had not been sold to Russia in December, it would have been an easy job for the government to refute that. So I think to a large extent, it shows that the country in its engagements with the United States still have a lot to explain, not because these are two sovereign nations, but in terms of something that it's really strategically important for the US and can be quite damaging for South Africa. But what we expect to see in the coming days, hopefully, is a clear response from the government in terms of where it stands, what decisions will be made, not to jeopardize the relationship it has with the US, with Europe, but also with other countries. I think the more uncertain South Africa becomes in terms of its foreign policy, the more reliable as a partner it is seen by other countries. And I think that it reflects not only in terms of the global north, but also in terms of being clear in terms of its relationship with other countries too.
Okay, Gustavo, I also think that you'll agree with me that at some point South Africa has to choose which side their bread is buttered, and that is talking about the AGWA or the BRICS. Now, how much damage will this case cause to the geopolitical relations that they have with these countries?
A I think a lot of countries have showed that non-alignment could work, and I think showing that there is the freedom of engaging with multiple partners. I think what we see right now it is the self-stated non-aligned position of South Africa is becoming difficult to justify. Not because South Africa shouldn't be non-aligned, but I think the actions that the country has been showing increasingly provides the international community an idea that, in fact, South Africa is aligning itself to Russia. The challenges now in terms of South Africa-United States relations is that the US individually is our second largest trading partner, and Russia is not. There is not a lot of trade that South Africa does with Russia, and much more diverse and much more important for the South African economy. So what many of us are worried about, what would be the implications in terms of our own ability of trade with the United States. There is ongoing negotiations in terms of AGOA or the flexible tax mechanisms that African countries have to access the US markets, and South Africa leaving that potentially could be very damaging for many of our industries, whether it's mining, whether it's chemical industry, whether it's our wine industry. All of those benefits tremendously from this preferential tax agreement with the United States. So certainly there is much of damage control the South African government will need to do. And hopefully that will come with some positive instances. Not necessarily that South Africa would take one side over the other, but I think what would be very beneficial for the country is having a foreign policy that is more clear, that presents better what interests are being pursued and how we're pursuing them. And that reflects not only the position of the government, but also how society itself sees as part of that dialogue and the societal debates that we are already seeing very heavily in the last 24 hours will continue and hopefully contribute to a more clear and coherent foreign policy from our side.
All right, thank you so much, political analyst Gustavo de Carvalho, for joining us on the news and helping us dissect the issue. We really do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.